The Apache Chief gave me a choice, my wife or my life, and he told me I had until dawn to decide. The Winchester in my hands felt heavier than a coffin. I watched the dust cloud get closer, 6 Apache riders cutting through the dying Arizona light. The year was 1878, and the desert had already taken everything from me. My crops were dust, my cattle were bones, my hope was a ghost. My wife Delilah came out of the cabin. Even covered in the dust of a failed life, she was still the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. She was 20, but had the eyes of someone who'd seen the world for what it was, a taker, not a giver. Her auburn hair caught the last of the sun, and for just a second, I forgot we were about to die. I'd borrowed money from Chief Nolish's band 6 months back, a desperate gamble to save our ranch. The terms were simple: pay it back double by the harvest, or face the consequences. Well, harvest had come and gone. All it brought was more dust. The riders stopped. They moved like ghosts, their moccasins making no sound on the hard-packed dirt. Chief Nolish slid off his pony. His face was a mask carved from desert rock, and his eyes missed nothing. He wasn't a man who made idle threats. "Ezra Blackwood," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried like a death sentence. "The moon has grown full and thin since we spoke. Your pockets are still empty." I stepped in front of Delilah. My heart was trying to hammer its way out of my chest, but I kept my voice flat. "You don't show fear to a predator." "Chief Nolish," I said, "the drought took it all. I've got nothing left to give." His eyes drifted past me, landing on Delilah. She stood on the porch, her hands gripping the railing, but she didn't flinch. She just stared right back at him. "Time is a luxury, Ezra Blackwood," Nolish said. "My people are hungry. Your promises of next spring won't fill their bellies." He walked around the yard, taking in the inventory of my failure. The broken gate, the dry well, the 3 scrawny chickens scratching in the dirt. "Your ranch is worthless," he said, his voice cold. "Your cattle wouldn't feed a child for a week. What could you possibly offer me?" The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I knew where this was going. I'd heard the stories. Settlers who crossed the Apache just disappeared. "I'll work for you," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I'll work until the debt is paid." He shook his head slowly. "A man's labor is worth what he produces, and you, Ezra Blackwood, have produced nothing but failure." That one hit me harder than a fist. This ranch wasn't just land, it was my soul, poured out into the dirt. And it had failed. I had failed. "Then what do you want?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He looked at Delilah again, her silhouette framed by the lamplight in the cabin doorway. She was a single point of beauty in a world of dust and death. "My youngest son, Tekka, needs a wife," the chief said. "The drought has been hard on all the tribes. Good women are scarce." The ground fell out from under me. I heard Delilah suck in a breath. "Your wife is young," Nolish continued, his voice calm, like he was discussing the price of grain. "She is strong. She would bear healthy sons for my son. In exchange for her, your debt is forgiven. You can walk away." I staggered back. My hand went to the Colt at my hip. The other Apache warriors tensed, their hands dropping to their own weapons. "No," I said, the word a ragged tear in the quiet air. "You can't have her." Delilah came down from the porch and stood next to me. Her face was pale, but her voice was a steel wire. "My place is with my husband," she said to the chief. "We face this together." Nolish nodded, a flicker of something like respect in his eyes. "Courage does not pay debts." He gestured to his men. They fanned out, surrounding us. We were miles from any neighbor. No one would hear the shots. "You have until dawn," the chief said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Give me your wife, or I will take both your lives." We sat in the cabin, the Apache campfire burning just outside, a constant reminder of the clock ticking down on our lives. The oil lamp on the table flickered, and in its weak light, I saw every line of worry on Delilah's face. "There has to be another way," she whispered, her hand covering mine. Her skin was rough from 2 years of trying to build a life out of this cursed dirt. She had never once complained. "I won't let them take you," I said, my voice thick. "I'd rather die." And I won't let you die for me, she shot back, standing up to pace the small room. If it comes to it, I'll go with them. Like hell you will, I growled, pulling her into my arms. We stood there, holding on to each other in the dark, watching the enemy fire. I had gambled everything to save this ranch, and in the end, it was the ranch that was going to bury us. As the hours crawled by, a cold, hard thought settled in my gut. This was my fault. I could have sold up after the first failed crop. I could have taken a job in town. But my pride, my stupid, stubborn pride, wouldn't let me. I'd chained Delilah to my own sinking dream. Do you regret it? I asked her, my voice barely a whisper. Marrying me? She turned in my arms. Never, she said, her green eyes fierce in the lamplight. You're a good man, Ezra Blackwood. Stubborn and foolish, maybe, but a good one. Whatever happens at dawn, know that these last 2 years, they were the happiest of my life. Tears welled in my eyes. I kissed her, tasting the salt of my own failure. The first hint of dawn was a pale, sickly gray line on the horizon. I made my decision. We would die fighting. I cleaned my Winchester, counting the 7 rounds I had left. It wasn't enough, but maybe it would be quick. Just as the sun touched the mountains, Chief Nolish was at our door. His warriors were behind him, rifles ready. Have you made your decision? He asked. I stepped onto the porch, Delilah right beside me. I could feel her trembling, but she held her head high. I have, I said, raising the rifle. The answer is no. Nolish nodded, like he expected it. Then you have chosen death. His warriors raised their rifles. I sighted down my barrel, picking my target. Time slowed to a crawl. This was it, the end of the line. But then, just as my finger tightened on the trigger, Nolish raised his hand. Wait, he said. His voice cut through the tension like a knife. He stepped forward, his hands empty and open. There is one other way. Hope is a dangerous thing in the desert. It's a mirage that can lead a man to his death. But I couldn't help it. A tiny flicker of it ignited in my chest. My people have an old tradition, the chief said, his eyes boring into mine, for debts that cannot be paid in silver or cattle. We call it the trial of 3 shadows. I stared at him, my rifle still half raised. What kind of trial? He pointed a long, leather-clad arm toward the jagged mountains. 3 challenges, each harder than the last, each designed to test a man's soul. Complete all 3 before the next full moon, and your debt is wiped clean. Your lives are your own. And if we fail? Delilah asked, her voice steady. The chief's expression was grim. If you fail even one, you both forfeit your lives. This wasn't a reprieve. It was just a different kind of execution. A slower, more elaborate one. How do we know you'll keep your word? I demanded. Nolish actually laughed, a rough barking sound. Your woman has spirit. I see why you fight for her. He reached into a pouch and pulled out a turquoise pendant, carved like an eagle. This was my grandfather's. I swear on his spirit and on these sacred mountains, if you complete the trials, you will be under my protection. An oath on an ancestor's spirit was unbreakable to the Apache. This was a real offer, a terrible, impossible offer. But it was better than certain death. I looked at Delilah. I saw the same desperate hope in her eyes that I felt in my own gut. We accept, I said. Then let the trial begin, Nolish declared. You have 15 days. The first shadow is the test of courage. You must travel to Skeleton Canyon. Deep inside, there is a sacred cave. You will retrieve the obsidian knife that belonged to the great war chief Cochise. Bring it to me. My stomach turned to ice. Skeleton Canyon. It was a place of ghosts and death, a place where the Apache had slaughtered hundreds of Mexican traders over the years. They said the ground was soaked in so much blood, nothing would ever grow there again. How will we know which knife is his? Delilah asked. A strange look crossed the chief's face. You will know, he said. A blade that has tasted the blood of 100 men carries its own spirit. He motioned to one of his warriors, who brought forward a pack horse loaded with supplies. Jerked meat, water skins, blankets, even ammunition for my rifle. Consider this an investment, Nolish said. And as he turned to leave, he looked around at my failed ranch one last time. This valley holds no water, he said. It was cursed from the beginning. Why did you choose it? It reminded me of home, and I said quietly, the mountains in Kentucky. A man chasing ghosts of places that no longer exist, the chief observed. That is a powerful curse. With that, he and his men rode away, leaving us alone with a pack horse, an impossible task, and the chilling feeling that we had just traded a quick death for a slow one. We were alive. But for how long? The journey to Skeleton Canyon took 3 days, each step taking us further into a land that felt older and meaner than anything I'd ever known. The sun was a hammer, and the silence was broken only by the crunch of our boots and the steady plodding of the pack horse. On the second day, we saw it in the distance, a dark slash in the mountainside, like a wound that would never heal. It looks like the mouth of hell, Delilah whispered. Maybe it is, I said. We made camp that night in the shadow of the canyon. The fire sputtered, and the darkness outside our small circle of light felt alive, watchful. The stories about this place came back to me, ghostly war cries on the wind, the spirits of the dead dragging the living down into the earth. At dawn, we left the pack horse and entered the canyon on foot. The stories hadn't lied. The ground was a carpet of bones. Skulls grinned up at us from the dust. Rib cages lay scattered like broken baskets. The air was cold, still, and dead. Every step echoed off the towering stone walls. It felt like we were walking down the throat of some great dead beast. How far? Delilah asked, her voice a hushed whisper. He said the cave was in the heart of the gorge, I replied, my eyes scanning the high rims for any sign of movement. Then we saw it, a dark opening in the canyon wall, 20 feet up a sheer cliff face. A narrow, crumbling ledge was the only way to it. Ancient, faded paintings of hunts and battles surrounded the entrance. That's it, I breathed. It has to be. I'll go, Delilah said immediately. I'm lighter. No, I said, slinging my rifle over my back. This is my debt, my trial. You stand watch. The climb was hell. The rock crumbled under my boots and fingers. Halfway up, a piece of sandstone broke free, and I was left dangling by my hands, the bone-littered ground spinning below me. But I held on. I pulled myself up, inch by agonizing inch, until I collapsed onto the narrow ledge. The cave mouth was a black void. It smelled of dust, old smoke, and something else. Something that smelled like fear itself. I lit a match. The small flame pushed back the darkness, revealing a chamber filled with ceremonial objects. Pottery, woven baskets, feathered headdresses. This place was sacred, and I was about to defile it. A shout from below made me jump. It was Delilah. Ezra! Movement on the rim! I think we're being watched. My blood ran cold. Had Nolish sent men to follow us? To make sure we died here? Keep watch! I yelled back, my voice echoing strangely in the cave. I had to be quick. I lit another match and pushed deeper, into a side passage. The paintings on these walls were different, darker. They showed spirits with grasping claws dragging men into fiery pits. And there, on a stone shelf, was a collection of weapons. Tomahawks, spear points, and dozens of knives. At the very back, wrapped in a piece of black, rotting cloth, was something different. My hands shook as I unwrapped it. It was a blade made of night. Pure black obsidian, honed to an edge so sharp it looked like it could cut the air itself. The moment my skin touched the handle, a shock went through me. Not of electricity, but of malice. It was pure, distilled hatred, given form. Visions flooded my mind. The flash of the blade, the spray of blood, the final terrified gasps of men long dead. This was it. The knife of Cochise. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a curse. A rock clattered outside. Someone was moving on the rim above Delilah. I wrapped the knife and shoved it in my shirt, the cold stone burning against my skin. The climb down was even worse than the climb up. It was like the canyon itself was trying to kill me, to keep the knife from leaving. I half climbed, half fell the last few feet, landing hard next to Delilah. She had her revolver out, pointed up at the rim. Did you get it? She whispered, not taking her eyes off the cliff top. I got it, I said, patting the lump in my shirt. And that's when a figure appeared on the ledge above us. It was an Apache warrior, but he wasn't from Nolish's band. He was old, his face painted in swirling patterns of white clay that seemed to twist and move. His eyes were pits of black fire. "Grave robber!" he shrieked, his voice echoing like a hawk's cry. "You have stolen from the ancestors. The spirits demand payment." More figures appeared on the rim, warriors painted for battle. But they weren't real. I could see the canyon wall through them. They were shimmering, translucent, ghosts, the spirits of the dead. "Run!" I choked out to Delilah. "Now!" We sprinted down the canyon, leaping over piles of bones. War cries erupted from the rim, but they weren't human sounds. They were ethereal, wailing cries that scraped at my soul. An arrow made of what looked like black smoke whistled past my head and shattered against the rock. We ducked into a narrow side passage as a volley of ghostly arrows rained down. "Who are they?" Delilah gasped. "The Guardians," I said, the terrible truth dawning on me. "Nolish didn't just send me to get a knife. He sent me into a guarded tomb." The obsidian blade against my chest felt like it was vibrating. It was humming with a dark energy, feeding on the presence of the spirits. And a thought, not my own, slid into my mind. They cannot see you if you walk in shadow, a shadow cast by a tall rock formation stretched across the canyon floor. It was our only chance. "Stay in the shadow," I told Delilah. "Don't step into the light for any reason." We moved, hugging the darkest parts of the gorge. The ghostly warriors on the rim seemed confused, looking right past us. We were invisible to them. We made it to the mouth of the canyon, bursting out into the blinding sunlight of the open desert. We didn't stop running. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out, not daring to look back. When we finally did, the canyon entrance was empty. The spirits were gone. But as we stumbled toward where we left the pack horse, Delilah grabbed my arm. "Ezra, look." She was pointing at the horse. It was standing right where we left it, but it wasn't alone. Standing beside it, his hand resting calmly on its neck, was the old shaman from the canyon rim. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was solid, real, and he was smiling at us. My first instinct was to raise my rifle, but the shaman just held up an empty hand. He wasn't threatening. He was waiting. "You carry the soul drinker," he said. His voice was like dry leaves skittering across rock. "It has chosen you. A poor choice. You are weak." "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping my rifle level. "I am the one who watches," he said. "The guardian. The knife was not meant to leave the canyon. You have broken a balance that has held for 1,000 years." The obsidian blade in my shirt suddenly felt immensely heavy, a weight not just of stone, but of stolen time and spilled blood. "Chief Nolish sent us," Delilah said, her voice shaking but firm. "It was part of a trial." The shaman's dark eyes fixed on her. "Nolish!" He spat the name like a curse. "He is a fool who meddles with powers he does not understand. He thinks the knife will serve him. It will serve only its own hunger." He then looked back at me. "It has marked you, Ezra Blackwood. Its hunger is now your hunger. Its rage is now your rage. You will carry the ghosts of every man it has killed." As he spoke, a wave of cold fury washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. I wanted to shoot him. I wanted to see the life drain from his eyes. The feeling was terrifying, and it wasn't mine. It was coming from the knife. "Take it back," I gritted out, fighting the urge. "We don't want it." The shaman laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "It is not so simple. Once taken, it must be earned, or it will consume you." He stepped away from the horse. "Nolish's trial is a fool's errand, but the spirits are patient. We will see if you survive, and if you do, we will be waiting." Then he turned and simply walked away, dissolving into the heat haze of the desert until he was nothing but a memory. We stood there in silence, the desert sun beating down on us. The first trial was over. We had survived, but we hadn't won. We had just traded one enemy for another, and this new one was inside my own head. It took us 2 days to get back to the ranch, and every step was a battle. The knife whispered to me. It showed me visions of power, of wealth, of Nolish and his men lying dead at my feet. It promised me everything I ever wanted if I would just give in, just kill, just let it feed. I had to focus on Delilah's voice, on the feel of her hand in mine, just to keep my own thoughts straight. When we rode into the yard, Nolish was there, waiting. He looked at me, and his eyes weren't triumphant. They were appraising, like a man checking a tool to see if it had broken. I pulled the wrap knife from my shirt and held it out. My hand was shaking. Nolish took it, but he didn't unwrap it. He simply nodded. You have passed the first shadow. The test of courage is complete. He saw the look on my face, the sweat on my brow. The knife spoke to you, he said. It wasn't a question. It tried to consume me, I said. It is a tool of great power, Nolish replied. Power must always be controlled. He tucked the wrapped blade into his belt. But courage is not enough to pay your debt. The second shadow awaits, the test of wisdom. He pointed east, toward a different set of mountains, their peaks shrouded in a strange purple haze. 3 days' ride from here is a place the old ones called the Valley of Riddles. In that valley stands a stone monument, covered in symbols no living man can read. The symbols are a map. A map to what? Delilah asked. A greedy light flickered in the chief's eyes. To a treasure so great it could buy an entire territory. Solve the riddle, find the treasure, and bring me one piece of it as proof. My heart sank. A treasure hunt, another suicide mission. And if we fail, then your bones will join the dozens of other fools who have tried and failed before you, Nolish said without a hint of pity. You have 9 days until the full moon. Do not waste them. Wisdom is a trickier foe than any ghost. He and his warriors turned and rode off, leaving us standing in the dust once more. We had faced the spirits of Skeleton Canyon and survived, but now we had to face something even more daunting, the greed of men and the secrets of the ancients. That night sleep wouldn't come. I could still feel the phantom weight of the knife against my skin, still hear its dark promises in the back of my mind. It was gone, but its poison remained. Ezra, Delilah whispered in the dark. That shaman, he said the knife marked you. I know, I said, my voice rough. I can still feel it. What if this is all a trick? She asked. What if there is no treasure? What if Nolish is just sending us to our deaths? It doesn't matter, I said, pulling her close. We passed the first test. We'll pass the second. But even as I said the words, I didn't believe them. The test of courage had almost broken my mind. What would the test of wisdom do? The journey to the Valley of Riddles was stranger than the one to Skeleton Canyon. The land itself seemed to get more twisted and unnatural the further east we went. Joshua trees reached for the sky like skeletal hands, and the rocks took on the shapes of screaming faces. On the third day we found it, a deep, circular canyon sunk into the desert floor. But unlike the rest of the barren landscape, the valley below was green, impossibly green. It was an oasis, filled with strange, lush plants and a lake that shimmered like a polished gem. How? Delilah breathed. From the rim we could see the monument at the center of the valley. A single pillar of black, slick stone, maybe 30 feet high, surrounded by a circle of smaller standing stones. The surface of the pillar was covered in writing, symbols that seemed to wriggle and squirm if you looked at them for too long. There's our riddle, I said. But as I scanned the area around the monument, a chill went down my spine. Ezra, look closer, Delilah said, her voice tight with fear. Between the stones. I looked, and then I saw them. Bodies, dozens of them. Skeletons in rusted conquistador armor. Mummified prospectors, their picks and pans still clutched in their bony hands. Apache warriors, arrows still bristling from their ribs. They were all in the same position, kneeling, facing the monument, their arms raised in a gesture of worship. They all died trying to solve it, I said. My mouth was as dry as the desert we'd just crossed. We made our way down a narrow, winding path into the valley. The air grew thick and humid, filled with the scent of unknown blossoms. The place felt ancient, alien. It didn't belong here. We camped by the shore of the strange lake, as far from the monument and its ring of dead worshippers as we could get. As night fell, the valley transformed. The plants began to glow with a soft, green phosphorescence. The surface of the lake rippled, though there was no wind, and from the monument, a sound began. It was a song, a low, humming melody that was beautiful and terrifying all at once. It wasn't made by a human voice. It was the stone itself, singing in the dark. The music pulled at something deep inside me, a promise of peace and knowledge, and an end to all my struggles. I wanted to walk toward it. I needed to see it up close. Delilah grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Don't listen to it, Ezra," she said, her eyes wide with fear. "It's a trap. That's how it gets you." She was right. The song was a siren call, luring treasure hunters to their doom. The men kneeling around the stone hadn't been killed. They had been captivated. They had knelt to listen and had never gotten up again. The next morning we approached the monument. The closer we got, the stronger the song became. Not in volume, but in my mind. It showed me things. It showed me our ranch, green and prosperous, with fat cattle and fields of tall corn. It showed me Delilah holding a baby in her arms. It offered me the life I had always dreamed of, the life I had failed to build. All I had to do was kneel. Just rest for a while. Just listen to the song. "It's a lie," Delilah shouted, her voice cutting through the illusion. "It's feeding on your hope, Ezra. Fight it." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog. She was right. I focused on the debt, on Nolish's threat, on the cold reality of our situation. The beautiful images flickered and died, replaced by a feeling of pure, malevolent anger from the stone. The song turned harsh and discordant. It didn't like being resisted. The symbols on the stone began to glow with a faint, purple light. They weren't a map. They were a lock, a puzzle. We spent hours studying them, trying to find a pattern, a key. Nothing made sense. It was a language not meant for human minds. By late afternoon, we were exhausted and no closer to an answer. I slumped against one of the outer stones, ready to give up. "Maybe we can't solve it," I said, defeated. "Maybe no one can." "Don't say that," Delilah said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was staring at our pack horse, which had followed us to the monument and was now standing perfectly still, its head cocked as if it too were listening to the stone's song. "Ezra," she said slowly, "the pack horse. Nolish gave it to us." "So? So why that horse? He has dozens. Why a pack horse loaded with supplies we could have packed ourselves?" She walked over to the animal, running a hand down its flank. And then she stopped. She knelt down, staring at its leg. "Ezra, get over here, now!" I went to her side. She pointed at the horse's left foreleg. Hidden in the thick hair was a brand. It wasn't a rancher's brand. It was a symbol, a complex, swirling pattern I had never seen before. Except I had. I looked from the brand on the horse to the glowing symbols on the monument. My heart hammered against my ribs. Near the bottom of the pillar, almost hidden in shadow, was the exact same symbol. It wasn't a map. It wasn't a riddle to be read. It was a keyhole, and we had the key. "The horse," I breathed, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Nolish knew. He knew the horse was the key. We led the animal toward the black monument. The closer it got, the more agitated it became, pulling back on the reins, its eyes rolling in fear. The humming from the stone grew louder, more intense, pressing in on us from all sides. It felt like standing next to a giant, invisible tuning fork. "Easy now," I whispered to the horse, stroking its neck, though my own hands were trembling. We forced it forward, step by reluctant step, until it stood directly in front of the glowing symbol on the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. The horse just stood there, quivering. The monument just hummed its terrible alien song. Then Delilah reached out and gently touched the brand on the horse's leg. The instant her fingers made contact, a blinding flash of purple light erupted from the symbol. A deep, grinding sound, like mountains being torn apart, echoed through the valley. A crack appeared in the face of the black monument, widening into a doorway that led into absolute darkness. The song stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise had been. The treasure was inside. We had solved the riddle. We peered into the opening. A set of steep, narrow stairs led down into the earth. The air that drifted up was cold and smelled of ozone and something else. Something metallic and ancient. I'm not letting you go down there alone, Delilah said, pulling out her revolver. Together we descended into the heart of the monument. The stairs were slick with some kind of condensation, and the walls were carved with the same writhing symbols as the outside. After what felt like a mile, the stairs opened into a vast, circular chamber. And in the center of the chamber was the treasure. It wasn't gold. It wasn't jewels. It was a pool of liquid light, a swirling, shimmering substance that looked like a captured galaxy, pulsing with a soft, internal luminescence. It cast dancing patterns on the high dome ceiling. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing I had ever seen. "What is it?" Delilah whispered in awe. "I don't know," I said, but I knew it was alive. I could feel a strange, benevolent energy coming from it, the complete opposite of the soul-sucking malice of the obsidian knife. This was life, pure, raw, creation itself. This was what Nolish was after, not wealth. This. I uncorked one of our water skins, emptied it onto the floor, and cautiously dipped it into the pool. The liquid light flowed into the skin without a sound. When I pulled it out, the leather itself seemed to glow from within. We had our proof, but as we turned to leave, a low groan echoed through the chamber. It wasn't coming from the pool. It was coming from the walls. I held up the lamp. The carvings on the walls. They weren't carvings anymore. They were moving, writhing, detaching themselves from the stone. Shadowy two-dimensional figures, thin as paper, with long, sharp claws and empty eye sockets. They peeled off the walls and began to drift toward us, silent and unstoppable. The guardians of the treasure. We didn't wait to see what they could do. We turned and scrambled back up the stairs, the silent, shadowy things flowing after us like a river of ink. We burst out of the monument into the afternoon sun, gasping for breath. Behind us, the stone door began to grind shut. One of the shadow creatures, a long, spindly thing, tried to squeeze through the closing gap. The stone door sliced it in two without slowing down. The two halves dissolved into wisps of black smoke. With a final deafening boom, the monument was sealed once more. We had the treasure. Now we just had to survive long enough to deliver it. The ride back was tense. I kept the glowing water skin wrapped in a blanket, but I could still feel its strange, warm energy. It was a feeling of life, of healing. The whispers of the knife in my mind grew fainter, drowned out by the quiet hum of the light. When we arrived back at the ranch, Nolish was there, as we knew he would be, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood his warriors, and on a litter carried between two of them lay a young man, pale and shivering with fever. It was his son, Tekka. Nolish's eyes locked onto the water skin in my hand. He ignored me completely and walked straight to the litter. "You have it," he said, his voice thick with a desperate hope. He took the water skin from me, his hands trembling. He uncorked it and let a single glowing drop fall onto the lips of his son. The effect was instantaneous. A healthy, rosy color flooded the boy's pale cheeks. His shivering stopped. His eyes fluttered open, clear and lucid. He sat up. Tekka was healed. A wave of relief washed over Nolish's face. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw not a fearsome chief, but a grateful father. "You have done it," he said. "You have passed the second shadow. My son will live. The debt is—" He stopped. A shadow fell over his face. He looked from his healthy son to the glowing water skin, then to Delilah. His expression hardened, the gratitude replaced by a grim, terrible resolve. "The debt is not paid," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Two trials are complete, but the hardest remains. The third shadow, the test of sacrifice." I stared at him, my blood running cold. "We did what you asked. We brought you the cure." "You brought me a miracle," Nolish corrected. "And miracles have a price. The old laws are clear. The spirits of the valley gave you its heart, a source of life. To restore the balance, a life of equal value must be given in return." He took a step toward us. His warriors raised their rifles. "I once asked for your wife to be a bride for my son," he said, his voice heavy with finality. "I was a fool. I did not understand the nature of his sickness. I did not need a wife for him. I needed this treasure." He held up the glowing water skin. "And now," he said, his dark eyes locking on Delilah, "I still need your wife. not as a bride, but as the sacrifice. The world stopped. All the air went out of my lungs. After everything we had been through, the ghosts, the madness of the singing stone, the shadow creatures, we were right back where we started. A Winchester in my hand, my wife's life on the line. No, I said, the word a raw scraping sound in my throat. I raised my rifle. Nolish's warriors leveled theirs. It was a standoff. A hopeless, pointless standoff that would only end with me and Delilah dead in the dirt. But before anyone could shoot, a weak voice cut through the tension. Father, it was Tekka. He was standing now, leaning on one of the warriors for support, but his eyes were clear and sharp. He looked older, wiser than a boy his age should be. Father, you are wrong, he said, his voice gaining strength. The prophecy is a riddle, just like the monument. You have heard the words, but you have not understood them. Nolish turned to his son, his face a mask of confusion and anger. What are you talking about? The law is clear. A life for a life. A life of equal value, Tekka quoted, his gaze sweeping over us. He looked at the glowing water skin, then at me. His eyes widened as if he were seeing something I couldn't. The treasure is a life giver. Its opposite is not another life. Its opposite is a life taker. Everyone was silent, trying to puzzle out his words. A life taker? What did that mean? Tekka's eyes fixed on my belt. The sacrifice is not my wife, I realized aloud, my hand dropping to my hip. It wasn't my Colt he was looking at. It was the empty leather sheath that had held the obsidian knife. It's the knife. Nolish stared at his son. The knife? It is a tool, an artifact. No, Tekka insisted, his voice ringing with certainty. It is a vessel. It holds the souls of every man it has killed. It is a thing of pure death. 100 lives trapped in a shard of night. That is the only sacrifice worthy of balancing the life you took from the valley. A cold dread and a flicker of hope warred in my chest. Nolish had the knife. He had taken it from me, but I could still feel its echo, a cold spot in my soul where its hunger had taken root. Tekka was right. The knife wasn't just an object. It was a presence, a malevolent entity. Give me the knife, I said to Nolish. The chief hesitated, his hand going to the wrapped bundle at his belt. He was a man trapped between his ancient laws and the strange, new wisdom of his miraculously healed son. Give it to me, I repeated, my voice hard. Let me finish the trial. For a long moment our eyes locked. Then with a slow, reluctant movement, he untied the bundle and held it out to me. The moment my fingers closed around the leather-wrapped handle, the whispers started again, stronger than ever, a chorus of rage and bloodlust screaming in my mind. Kill them, the knife shrieked. Kill the chief. Take the boy. Take the liquid light. You can be a king, a god. Visions of fire and slaughter flooded my senses. I saw myself cutting down Nolish and his warriors. Delilah at my side, a dark queen ruling over an empire of dust and fear. The power it offered was intoxicating. It felt right. Ezra! Delilah's voice cut through the red haze. I looked at her, at the terror and love warring in her eyes, and I saw the future the knife was offering for what it was, an empty, soulless hell. I was Ezra Blackwood, a failed rancher, a stubborn husband. I was not a murderer. I was not a king. I turned my back on them all and started walking. East, back toward the Valley of Riddles. The trial is not over, Nolish called after me. You must return it to the valley, to the pool of light. I didn't answer. I just kept walking, the knife screaming in my head with every step. I don't remember much of that journey. It was a nightmare of fighting the blade's influence. It showed me every weakness, every dark thought I'd ever had. It promised me revenge on the drought, on the bad luck, on the world that had beaten me down. But every time I felt myself slipping, I would think of Delilah's face, of her hand in mine, of her voice saying, "You're a good man, Ezra Blackwood." And it was just enough. I reached the valley. The monument was closed and silent, but I knew what I had to do. I laid the wrapped knife at the base of the black stone. A debt must be paid, I said to the silent stone. A life taker, for a life giver. This is my sacrifice, not my wife, not my life. This. I unwrapped the blade and laid the bare obsidian on the ground. Take it, and let us be free. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground beneath the knife began to glow with that faint purple light. The obsidian blade began to dissolve, not melting, but turning into black smoke, the same smoke the shadow creature had become. A final, agonized shriek echoed in my mind. And then, silence. The cold spot in my soul was gone. The whispers were gone. For the first time in days, my mind was my own. I returned to the ranch, exhausted, but whole. Nolish and his people were still there. Tekka was sitting up eating. He looked like a different person. Nolish walked over to me. There was no threat in him now, only a deep, quiet respect. The trial is complete, he said. The debt is paid. He gestured to his men who brought forward 2 strong, healthy horses and bags loaded with food, grain, and a heavy pouch of gold coins. This is not a gift, the chief said, placing the pouch in my hand. It is payment. You did not just save my son's life. You saved me from my own blind pride. You have taught me the meaning of wisdom. I looked over at Delilah. She was smiling, tears streaming down her dusty cheeks. We took the horses and the supplies, but we didn't stay at the ranch. That dream was dead, poisoned by dust and debt. We turned the new horses west toward the setting sun, leaving the failed ranch and its ghost behind us. We didn't know where we were going, only that we were going there together. Free. We had walked into the desert with a debt of silver and walked out having paid it with courage, wisdom, and a sacrifice of darkness I never knew I carried. The desert takes a lot from a man, it's true, but sometimes if you're strong enough to face its trials, it gives something back. It gives you back your soul. If you enjoyed this story, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It tells the algorithm that you want to see more tales from the dusty, forgotten corners of history. And let me know in the comments below. When the chief made his final offer, what would you have sacrificed?